Greetings. I am Reverend Heather Fosburgh, and I serve as your Associate Conference Minister here in the Southeast Conference. This Lenten season, your conference staff is offering Lenten reflections each week, of which this is the third reflection. We hope that these reflections will be part of your Lenten journey this season. For this Lent, we here in the Southeast Conference are sitting with the idea of fasting as acts of abundance that lead us to community and to God. Fasting can be a reminder that we take only what we need, that there is plenty for the rest of our communities, and that we really don't need as much to live, as much to thrive, as the culture around us tells us that we need. That we can be happy and fulfilled with less, and that there is actually enough for everyone. I think Jesus modeled this in his ministry at a number of different times, but my favorite example is the feeding of the 5,000. Now, Matthew 14 tells the story in this way, and I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from them into a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages to buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And when all ate and were filled, they took up what was left over of the broken pieces. 12 baskets were full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now, we often call this a miracle. The feeding of the 5,000, the multiplication. And I do think this was a miracle, but I'm not sure it's a miracle in the same way that we often think it was. Perhaps the loaves and fish did multiply as if by magic, but I suspect the miracle that happened, and I'm not alone, this isn't a new theory, was that the people who were gathered multiplied the breads and fish by sharing. That those who were gathered brought out what they had and shared it with the complete strangers that were sitting next to them. That the person who brought enough that could feed 5 people shared it with the 4 people sitting around them. And that those who hadn't brought anything with them didn't go hungry, but instead feasted on what the others were willing to share. And that in and of itself, I think, was the miracle. That people realized in those moments that there was enough for everyone to be filled. And not only filled, but that there would be leftovers. Enough to fill 12 baskets. Sometimes I think this could be a far-fetched solution, but then I remember what I've seen at concerts, at conventions, that waiting in line, somebody brought 2 extra water bottles and they share it with the folks next to them as they stand out in the heat. That somebody has a bag of almonds and they pass it around the group, waiting in line or waiting in their seats for a show to start. because they know they only need a few handfuls and they have a whole bag. And as we wait, everyone is filled. And as we wait, new community is formed. So what's the lesson for us this day? How can we share out of our abundance, especially when it feels like there isn't abundance? Prices are going up. There have been shortages over the strangest things in the last 2 years. But even in that, there have been opportunities to see that there is enough. I remember stories of folks who happen to have bought extra paper towels, being willing to share them with their neighbors when you couldn't get them. Folks being able to offer rides to neighbors because they can't afford to fill up their cars. Of folks who don't have power because of storms or because of shortages of being able to afford it. Having neighbors willing to let them use their laundry machine, making sure they have food or somewhere safe to keep their food while they wait for power to come back. What if we lived in a way that reminded us that there is enough for everyone if we take what we need and share with those who don't have access? I think what would happen is that we would find stronger communities, that we would find friends, family, in people and places that we didn't expect. That we would find peace. Because we wouldn't be competing with one another out of this idea that there isn't enough and that we all need more because we think there's a scarcity when God has made sure that there is an abundance. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find what those gathered listening to Jesus found that day. A community, connections with the people who had been strangers just minutes before. And perhaps we'll find God in our midst, smiling at us and thinking, I told you there was enough. You just needed to believe me. May it be so. Amen.